They told me my late mother left nothing but a locked smokehouse. What I found inside changed everything. If you've ever been told your story was over before it even began, if you've ever felt like you were starting from nothing, then stick around and hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to exist, at least according to the state. For the last 6 years, I had been a file in a cabinet, a name on a list, a bed in a room with 3 other boys who were also files in cabinets. The West Hill Group Home for Boys wasn't a home, but it was the only thing I'd had that resembled one since my mother died. The air that morning was thick with the smell of institutional bleach and the cheap industrial toast they served every single day. It was a smell I thought I'd be glad to leave behind, but standing there with my entire life packed into a single black trash bag, all I felt was a hollow kind of dread. Mr. Henderson, the facility director, stood by the door with his arms crossed. He was a man made of soft angles and tired sighs. He'd seen hundreds of boys like me come and go. To him, this was just another Tuesday. "Leo," he said, his voice flat. "Bus tickets on the table. Social services wired the final stipend to your debit card. It's not much, but it's a start." I looked at the thin paper bus ticket and the flimsy piece of plastic that represented my entire net worth. A start. It felt more like an end. "There's also this," he added, pushing a creased manila envelope across the scratched laminate of the reception desk. "Came for you a week ago, from a lawyer's office." My heart did a slow, painful lurch. A lawyer. The only time I'd ever dealt with lawyers was when my mother died, and men in cheap suits had explained in very simple terms that there was nothing. No will, no savings, no family. Just me, a ward of the state. I picked up the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy. My name and the group home's address were typed on the front. In the corner, the return address was a firm I'd never heard of. Abernathy and Finch, attorneys at law. "They know you're of age today," Mr. Henderson said, already looking past me, probably thinking about lunch. "They said it was urgent. Good luck, Leo." And that was it. No handshake, no pat on the back, just a good luck that sounded more like a dismissal. I pushed open the heavy steel door and the sounds of the city rushed in. The hiss of bus brakes, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of a world that hadn't waited for me. The sun was bright and I had to squint. For 6 years, my world had been beige walls and fluorescent lights. The sheer, unfiltered reality of the outside felt like an assault. I slung the trash bag over my shoulder. It held 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, a worn copy of a book my mother had given me long ago, and a toothbrush. Everything I owned. I walked to the bus station, the envelope a strange, warm weight in my hand. I didn't open it. Part of me was terrified of what it might contain. More debt, more bad news, another final closing of a door I never knew was open. The bus smelled of stale air and disinfectant, a scent so familiar it was almost comforting. I found a seat by a grimy window and watched the city blur past. For the first time in my life, I had no one to report to, nowhere I was required to be. I was free, and I had never felt more lost. The bus station faded, the familiar gray buildings giving way to suburbs, and then to the long, empty stretches of highway. I was just a ghost moving through a landscape that didn't know I existed. I finally worked up the nerve to open the envelope. My fingers trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a letter, printed on thick, expensive-feeling paper. It was from a man named Arthur Abernethy. The language was dense and formal, full of legal terms that swam before my eyes. But I pieced it together. My mother, who I'd been told had died with nothing, had in fact owned a piece of property, a small parcel of land just under 3 acres, with a house and an outbuilding. It was in a place called Sparrow Creek, a town I'd never even heard of. My breath caught in my throat. A house. Land. It felt impossible, like a line from a storybook. But the letter was cold and real. It went on to explain that the property was in a state of severe disrepair. The county had placed liens on it for years of unpaid taxes. The total amount owed was staggering, far more than the few $100s on my debit card. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Of course, there was always a catch. It wasn't a gift, it was a debt. Another failure I was being handed. But there was more. The letter mentioned a standing offer from a development corporation, Titan Holdings. They wanted to buy the land. The offer was for $50,000. After the back taxes and legal fees were settled, I would be left with a little over $35,000. $35,000. The number seemed astronomical, unreal. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding in my life. It was a ticket to a new start, a real one. A small apartment, a community college course, a life. All I had to do was sign the papers, which Mr. Abernethy had conveniently included. The letter concluded by saying that my mother's will had stipulated this information was to be withheld until my 18th birthday. It was, he wrote, her final wish. I stared out the window at the rolling green hills. My mother. For 6 years, they had told me she was a tragic story, a woman who had struggled and lost. They painted her as someone who had left me with nothing but the burden of her absence. But this was something else. She had left me a choice, a way out. Tucked behind the legal documents was a smaller, sealed envelope. On the front, in my mother's familiar looping script, was my name, Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a ghost's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in 6 years, but I knew it as well as my own face. With shaking hands, I opened it. It wasn't a long letter, just a few lines on a piece of notepaper. My dearest Leo, it read. If you are reading this, it means I'm gone, and you are finally a man. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you've been told I left you with nothing. I hope this proves them wrong. The money is yours. Take it and build a good life, a safe life. That's all I ever wanted for you. Don't go to the house. There's nothing for you there but ghosts. Just take the money and run. Please. Your loving mother, Elena. I read it again, and then a third time. The words were a confusing mix of love and warning. Take the money, but don't go to the house. Nothing for you there but ghosts. But the property, the house, the land, it was the only thing of hers left in the world. How could I sell it without ever seeing it? How could I let go of the last piece of her? The bus rumbled on, carrying me further and further away from the only life I knew. I looked at the legal papers, the offer from Titan Holdings, and my mother's desperate plea. Then I looked at the bus ticket Mr. Henderson had given me. It was a one-way ticket to a city 3 states away, to a shelter and a job placement program. A path laid out for me by the system. But the letter from the lawyer had given me another address, Sparrow Creek. I had a choice. I could follow my mother's instructions, sign the papers, and take the money. Start over, clean and unburdened. Or I could go to a place she warned me away from, a place with nothing but ghosts. I looked down at her handwriting again, the way she wrote my name. I could almost hear her voice. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sign it away. I had to see it. I had to stand on the land she owned, breathe the air she breathed. I had to understand why she wanted me to stay away. At the next major terminal, I got off the bus. I walked up to the ticket counter, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. I traded my ticket for another one, a one-way ticket to a small town I'd never heard of in the middle of nowhere. A one-way ticket to Sparrow Creek. The lawyer, Arthur Abernathy, agreed to see me the following day. His office was on the second floor of a brick building that smelled of old paper and floor polish. It was the only building in Sparrow Creek's tiny downtown that was more than 1 story high. The town itself was little more than a crossroads, a single blinking traffic light governing the intersection of a gas station, a general store, and a diner with a faded sign that just said, "Eat." It was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. The city was a constant roar. This was a low hum of wind and distant bird song. Abernathy was an older man, with kind eyes and a face etched with the lines of someone who listened more than he talked. He wore a tweed jacket that looked like it had been in style 30 years ago and suited him perfectly. He didn't look like the lawyers from the city. He looked like a character from an old movie. He shook my hand firmly. His office was cluttered but clean, filled with towers of books and files that seemed to defy gravity. "Leo," he said, gesturing to a worn leather chair. "I'm glad you came. I was sorry to hear about your mother. Elena was a good woman." The words were simple, but he said them with a sincerity that caught me off guard. No one had called her a good woman in a long time. They usually used words like troubled or unfortunate. "You got my letter, obviously," he continued, settling behind his large oak desk. "I have the paperwork for the sale right here. Titan Holdings is eager to close. It's a generous offer, all things considered." "Why do they want it so badly?" I asked, the question surprising even myself. I'd meant to just listen, to nod and seem like I knew what I was doing. Abernathy leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Progress, son. That's what they call it. Your mother's property abuts a large tract of land they purchased a few years ago. They're planning a major resort development. Golf course, luxury cabins, the works. Your 3 acres are a key access point to the main highway. Without it, their project gets a lot more complicated and expensive." "So it's worth more to them than they're offering," I stated. It wasn't a question. He gave me a small, approving nod. "Considerably more, but the offer on the table is fair market value for a dilapidated property with significant tax liens. And for a young man in your position, $35,000 is a significant sum. It's a clean break." A clean break. The same words my mother used. Take the money and run. It felt too clean, too easy. "The letter, my mother's letter," I started, my voice unsteady. "She told me not to come here." Abernathy's expression softened. "She wanted to protect you, Leo. She was a fierce protector. The last few years of her life, they were difficult. She was worried. She wanted you to have a fresh start, away from all this." "Away from what?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Sparrow Creek is a small town. People have long memories. Your mother, she made some enemies. Not everyone was happy with her refusal to sell to Titan years ago. She believed this land, her land, was worth more than money. He slid the developer's contract across the desk. Your mother's instructions in her will were very clear. I was to present you with this offer. She wanted the choice to be yours, but she made her preference plain. She wanted you to be safe. I looked at the signature line, waiting for my name. This was it. The easy way out, the safe path, the life she apparently wanted for me. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a crucial piece of the story. Why would she fight so hard to keep a piece of land only to tell me to sell it without a second thought? What about the Smokehouse? I asked. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. The Smokehouse? It's just an old stone outbuilding used for curing meat back in the day. Your grandfather built it. It's solid, I'll give it that. Why? My mother's will, I said, remembering a detail from the dense legal document. It mentioned it specifically. The contents of the locked smokehouse, if any, are to be bequeathed to my son, Leo, to do with as he sees fit. The lawyer nodded slowly. That's right. A strange clause. As far as anyone knows, it's been locked for years. Probably empty. Elena was sentimental about some things. Probably empty. But she had it mentioned in her will, and she warned me away from the property. The two things felt connected, like two ends of a string that disappeared into a knot. I want to see it, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. The property, before I sign anything. Abernathy studied me for a long moment. I expected him to argue, to push the contract on me again, to tell me I was being foolish. Instead, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, rusty iron key. I thought you might say that, he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. Your mother was stubborn, too. This is the key to the front door of the house, or what's left of it. The smokehouse is padlocked. You'll have to deal with that yourself. He slid the key across the desk. It was cold and heavy in my palm. The property is about 2 miles down the old logging road. You can't miss it. Take your time, son. The offer from Titan isn't going anywhere. But once you sign, there's no going back. I left his office with the key in my pocket and a growing sense of unease and determination. The ghosts my mother had warned me about felt closer now, waiting for me down that old road. A local man from the diner, a grizzled old-timer named Sal, gave me a ride. He eyed my trash bag and my city clothes with open curiosity. Abernathy's office, huh? He said, as his ancient pickup truck rattled down the paved road. You must be Elena's boy. News traveled fast in Sparrow Creek. I am, I said. Heard you were coming of age, Sal grunted. Shame about your mother. She was a fighter. He turned off the main road onto a gravel path nearly swallowed by overgrown trees. The truck bounced and jostled, and branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. This is the old logging road, he said. Not many people come down here anymore. Not since Titan bought up everything else. Did you know her well? I asked. Sal was quiet for a moment. Knew her well enough. She kept to herself mostly, especially near the end. But she loved this land, said it was in her blood. Her father built that house with his own 2 hands. She wasn't going to let some corporation pave it over for a bunch of rich folks to play golf. He pulled the truck to a stop where the road dissolved into a muddy track. This is as far as I can go. It's just up ahead. You'll see it through the trees. I got out, grabbing my bag. The air was different here. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and decay. "Thanks for the ride," I said. Sal just nodded. "You watch yourself, son. There's more than just ghosts in these woods." He put the truck in reverse and backed away, leaving me alone in a tunnel of green shadows. I walked. The path was slick with mud and rotting leaves. After a few hundred yards, I saw it. Through a break in the trees, a warped roofline sagged against the sky. The house was in worse shape than I could have imagined. It was a skeleton. The porch had collapsed on one side, and the windows were dark, empty eyes. Paint peeled from the clapboard siding like sunburnt skin. The yard was a wild jungle of weeds and thorny bushes that grew chest high. It was heartbreaking. This was my legacy, a ruin. But then I saw it. Standing about 50 feet from the house, partially hidden by a thicket of overgrown lilac bushes, was the smokehouse. It was exactly as Abernathy had described it. A small, windowless structure made of dark, solid fieldstone with a heavy wooden door and a steep-pitched roof. It looked ancient and indestructible, a fortress in the middle of all this decay. And on the door, glinting in the dappled sunlight, was a thick, rust-caked padlock. I dropped my bag and walked toward it, my boots sinking into the soft ground. The air around the smokehouse felt different, colder. I stood before the door, running my hand over the rough, cool stone. My grandfather built this. My mother locked it, and she mentioned it in her will. Whatever secrets this place held, they were in there. I had to get inside. The key Abernathy gave me slid into the lock of the main house with a grating screech. The door groaned open, revealing a scene of utter dereliction. The air inside was thick and musty, heavy with the smell of mold and time. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light that pierced the grimy windows. Furniture, what little was left of it, was draped in white sheets, looking like a congregation of ghosts. A sofa, a single armchair, a dining table. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. In the kitchen, a calendar was still pinned to the wall. The month was June, 6 years ago. A circle was drawn around the 15th, the day she died. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it felt like a physical blow, knocked the air from my lungs. I had to steady myself against the doorframe. For all these years, her death had been an abstract fact, a story told to me by strangers. But this place, this made it real. This was where her life had simply stopped. I moved through the small house like a trespasser. Her bedroom was sparse. A bed stripped bare, an empty dresser. In the closet, a few of her dresses still hung on hangers, their colors faded. I touched the sleeve of a simple cotton dress, half expecting it to crumble to dust. I could almost smell her perfume, a faint trace of lavender and vanilla. It was the scent of every hug I could remember. I had to get out. The house was too heavy, too full of what was lost. I stumbled back outside, gasping for fresh air. My focus returned to the smokehouse. It stood there, impassive and silent. I needed to get in. I went back to the house and rummaged through the dilapidated kitchen. I found a rusty toolbox under the sink. It contained a hammer and a long, heavy-duty screwdriver. It would have to be enough. Back at the smokehouse, I wedged the tip of the screwdriver into the shackle of the padlock. I hammered at the handle, the metallic clang echoing unnaturally in the quiet woods. The rust was thick, fused by years of rain and neglect. My hands were raw and my arms ached, but I kept hammering, fueled by a desperate, frantic energy. It was more than just a lock. It felt like a barrier between my past and my future, between the story I'd been told and the truth. With a final, ear-splitting crack, the shackle snapped. The padlock fell to the ground with a dull thud. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing heavily, my heart pounding. The door was a thick slab of oak, swollen with damp. I put my shoulder into it and pushed. It resisted, scraping against the stone floor. I pushed harder, grunting with the effort, until it finally gave way, opening just enough for me to slip through. I stepped inside. It was dark, and the smell hit me immediately. Not mold or decay like the house. It smelled of old, cold smoke, of stone and dust, and something else, something dry and papery. It was the smell of secrets. A single sliver of light from the open door cut through the darkness, illuminating a small, square space. The walls were blackened with soot from a century of use. The floor was packed earth. In the center of the room, there was no old curing equipment or hanging hooks. There was just one thing: a large, green, military-style footlocker. It was heavy steel, with sturdy latches on the front. It wasn't locked. With trembling hands, I knelt down and unfastened the latches. They sprang open with a loud click. I lifted the heavy lid. My breath hitched. The box was filled to the brim. On the very top was a thick, sealed envelope, and underneath it, I could see them. Stacks and stacks of cash, bundled in paper bands. Not just a few $1,000s. It looked like a fortune. And next to the money, there were more envelopes, a leather-bound journal, and what looked like a pile of official documents. I reached in and took out the top envelope. It was just like the one I'd received at the group home, with my name written in my mother's hand. I ripped it open. The letter inside was much longer than the first one. "My Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you didn't listen. You stubborn boy, just like your father. I told you to take the money and run. I hoped you would. But I knew there was a part of you, the part that is most like me, that wouldn't be able to let it go. So if you're here, in this place, then you need to know the truth. All of it." I sat down on the cold floor of the smokehouse, the footlocker open before me, and began to read the story of my mother's life and of her death. The money from the developer, the $35,000, was a trap, a test. My mother explained it all. The company, Titan Holdings, wasn't just a developer. They were criminals, masquerading as legitimate businessmen. Their CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne, had built his empire on bribery, extortion, and intimidation. My father, a local journalist, had been investigating them years ago. He was getting close to exposing a massive fraud scheme involving illegal dumping of toxic waste on land they were acquiring for development. He was getting close, and they found out. The official story was that he died in a car accident, a single-vehicle crash on a winding country road late at night. No witnesses. My mother never believed it. She knew they had killed him. After his death, she was left alone with me, a baby. She tried to continue his work, to find the evidence he'd been gathering. But they came after her. Not with violence at first. They used threats. They used the law. They tried to declare her an unfit mother, to take me away from her. They wanted the land, my father's family land, not just for the highway access, but because my father had suspected they were using a remote corner of it for their illegal dumping. My mother fought them. She spent every penny she had on lawyers. She held them off, but she was terrified they would eventually win, or that they would resort to more direct methods. She knew she couldn't protect me forever. So she made a plan, a desperate, heartbreaking plan. She started collecting her own evidence. She documented everything. Every threat, every suspicious car that drove down her road, every bit of information she could find about Titan's operations. She gathered it all, the proof my father had been looking for, and she hid it, along with every dollar she could save. She knew she couldn't keep me with her. It wasn't safe. So she did the most painful thing a mother could do. She created a narrative. She started acting erratically. She missed appointments. She got into arguments in town. She made it look like she was unstable, like she was crumbling under the pressure. She built a case against herself, so that when the state finally stepped in, it would look legitimate. So they would take me from her and place me in the system, where she believed I would be safe, anonymous, a file in a cabinet, invisible to the men who were hunting her. "It broke my heart every day, Leo," she wrote, and the ink on the page was blurred, as if from a tear that had fallen long ago. "To know you were growing up in a place without love, thinking your mother had abandoned you. But it was the only way I could keep you alive. They couldn't get to you in there. They wouldn't even look for you. You were just another lost boy." My world tilted on its axis. The entire foundation of my life, the story of the troubled mother who couldn't cope, was a lie. It wasn't an abandonment. It was a sacrifice, a strategic retreat designed to save my life. I was crying, silent, hot tears tracking paths through the dust on my cheeks. I cried for the 6 years I had spent hating her for leaving me. I cried for the woman who had to tear her own life apart to protect her son. The letter continued. She explained that she knew they would eventually come for her. She had made herself a target to draw their attention away from me. She set up the will with Abernathy, creating the offer from Titan as a final test. If I took the money and ran, she would know I was safe, and her sacrifice was worth it. "But if you are here," she wrote, "it means the fight in you is stronger than the fear. And that means you need the tools to win." The money in the box, she explained, was over $200,000. Her life savings, cash from the sale of a small property my grandparents had owned in another state, everything she had. It wasn't for running away. It was a war chest. "Use it to fight them, Leo," the letter urged. "Use it to fix the house. Use it to hire the best lawyers. Don't let them win. This land is our home. It's the only thing we have left of your father. Don't let them pave over his memory." At the bottom of the box, beneath the cash and the journal, was a thick file of documents. There were soil sample reports, photographs of corroded barrels half buried in a ravine at the far edge of the property, sworn affidavits from 2 former Titan employees who had disappeared shortly after signing them. It was the evidence, the proof my father had died for, and my mother had given up her life to protect. I sat there in the cold, dark smokehouse for what felt like hours, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The grief was immense, a physical ache in my chest. But underneath the grief, something else was taking root, a slow, burning anger. And beneath that, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time: purpose. My mother hadn't left me a burden. She hadn't left me a ruin. She had left me a mission. She had left me a choice, not between selling and keeping, but between hiding and fighting. I closed the lid of the footlocker. The decision was already made. There was no running. Not anymore. I thought about the man who gave me a ride, Sal. She was a fighter, he'd said. I finally understood what he meant. This wasn't just about land or money. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the story that had been stolen from me, from my father, from my mother. I was not just an orphan from a group home. I was the son of Elena and David, and this was my fight now. The path ahead felt terrifying and uncertain. I was an 18-year-old kid with a trash bag of clothes and a box full of secrets, up against a powerful, ruthless corporation. The odds were impossible. But for the first time in my adult life, which was less than 2 days old, I knew exactly who I was and what I had to do. I would not sell. I would not run. I would stay. I would fix the house. And I would fight. I would finish what my parents started. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, moving the footlocker from the smokehouse into the dusty living room of the main house. It was too heavy to carry far, but I managed to drag it inside, securing it in the one place that felt remotely like home. The sheer reality of my situation was beginning to sink in. I had a dilapidated house, a jungle for a yard, and a legal battle that could get me killed. But I also had $250,000 in cash and the evidence to burn an empire to the ground. It was a strange kind of balance. I slept that night on the dusty, sheet-covered sofa. It was uncomfortable, and the house was full of strange creaks and groans, the sounds of a structure settling into its own decay. But I slept better than I had in years. I wasn't in a room full of strangers anymore. I was in my own home, flawed, broken, but mine. The next morning, I walked the 2 miles back into town. The journey felt different this time. I wasn't an aimless wanderer anymore. I was a man with a purpose. My first stop was the bank. Walking in with a backpack containing $20,000 in cash felt surreal. The teller, a young woman with a skeptical look on her face, gave me a hard time. But I had my ID, and I had the letter from Abernathy's office explaining my inheritance. After a long call to her manager, they opened a new account for me. Seeing that balance on the screen, a number with a comma in it, made it feel real. It was the first step. My second stop was Abernathy's office. He looked up from his desk when I walked in, his expression unreadable. "Leo," he said, "I was wondering when I'd see you again. Did you bring the signed papers?" I walked up to his desk and placed the unsigned Titan Holdings contract in front of him. "I'm not signing it," I said. He didn't look surprised. He just leaned back in his chair and studied me. "The house is in pretty bad shape, isn't it?" "It is," I agreed, "but it's my home. I'm not selling." Titan Holdings won't be happy to hear that. They don't like the word no. "I don't care what they like," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but my resolve firm. My mother didn't sell, and neither will I. I hesitated, then I took a breath. I had to trust someone, and my mother had trusted him. I told him everything, about the smokehouse, the footlocker, the money, the journal, the evidence. I told him about my father's investigation and my mother's sacrifice. I talked for almost an hour, my voice raw with emotion. He listened patiently, his kind eyes never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt once. When I was finished, the room was silent. Abernathy stared at the wall for a long time, his face grim. "I knew," he said, his voice quiet. "I didn't know the details, not all of this. But I knew Elena was afraid. I knew your father's death wasn't an accident. I represented her for years. I saw the threats they made. But she never told me she had the evidence. She kept that part to herself. To protect me, I suppose. And you." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new respect. "She would be so proud of you, son, and so terrified." "What do I do now?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. "Now," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "we fight. This changes things. This isn't just a property dispute anymore. This is a criminal case. And that file you have? That's the smoking gun." He explained the plan. We couldn't just go to the local police. Titan had them in their pocket. We had to go bigger. State investigators, maybe even federal. But we had to be smart. We had to build our case quietly, secure the evidence, and make sure I was protected. "The first thing you need to do," he said, "is make that house livable. You need to establish residency. Show them you're not going anywhere. It makes your claim to the land stronger. And it sends a message to Thorne and his people." He gave me the names of a few locals he trusted. A roofer, a plumber, an old contractor who owed him a favor. "Use the money," he said. "That's what it's for. Invest it in the property. Every dollar you spend makes it more yours." That afternoon, I started. I bought work gloves, heavy-duty trash bags, and a scythe from the general store. The owner, a man named Mr. Gable, looked me up and down. "You're Elena's boy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Fixing up the place?" "I am," I said. He nodded, a slow, thoughtful expression on his face. "About time someone did. Your mother would like that." The work was brutal. The first week was just clearing the yard. I hacked away at the thorny jungle of weeds and bushes, uncovering the original stone pathways and the footprint of a garden my mother had once tended. My hands blistered, my back ached, and every night I collapsed onto the dusty sofa, too tired to even think. But with every swing of the scythe, I felt like I was reclaiming something. I wasn't just clearing weeds. I was clearing away the neglect, the sadness that had shrouded the property for so long. One evening, as I was hauling a pile of branches to the edge of the woods, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize pulled up the road and stopped. Two men in expensive suits got out. They didn't look like they belonged in the woods. They looked like they belonged in a corporate boardroom or a back alley. "Leo?" one of them called out. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Mark, from Titan Holdings. We heard you decided not to accept our generous offer." I stood my ground, my heart pounding. This was it, the first contact. "It wasn't for sale," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The man's smile tightened. "Look, kid, we admire your sentimentality. Truly. But let's be realistic. This place is a wreck. You're a kid with no resources. You can't possibly fix it up. Take the money. Go to college. Have a life. It's what your mother would have wanted." His words were almost identical to the ones in her first letter. The lie she had constructed for them. "My mother wanted me to make my own choice," I said, "and I'm choosing to stay." The second man, who hadn't spoken, took a step forward. He was bigger, more imposing. "That would be a mistake," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Things have a way of going wrong out here. Faulty wiring, accidental fires. It's a dangerous place for a boy all alone. It was a threat, clear and unmistakable. The same kind of threat they must have used on my mother. For a second, fear seized me, cold and sharp. I was just a kid. They were right. What was I doing? But then I thought of my mother's letter, of her face in the one photo I had of her. I thought of the evidence locked in the footlocker inside the house. The fear didn't vanish, but the anger rose to meet it. "I'm not alone," I said, looking them both in the eye, "and I'm not scared of you." The first man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You should be," he said. "The offer stands for another week. After that, it's off the table. Think carefully, Leo." They got back in their SUV and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and the smell of expensive cologne in their wake. I stood there, shaking, until the sound of their engine faded completely. The threat had been real, but something had shifted inside me. They didn't scare me into submission. They solidified my resolve. They had shown their hand, and it had only made me more determined to show them mine. The next day, the contractor Abernathy recommended showed up. His name was Hank, a gruff man in his 60s with hands like leather. He walked around the house, sucking his teeth and shaking his head. "She's got good bones," he said after a long inspection of the foundation and the main beams. "Your grandpa built this to last, but the neglect, it's a crime." He quoted me a price to fix the roof, replace the windows, and get the plumbing and electricity working again. It was a lot of money, but it was a fraction of what was in the footlocker. "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. Hank looked at me, surprised. "Just like that? You got that kind of money, kid?" "I do," I said. He grunted. "All right then, you're the boss." Work began in earnest. Hank and his small crew descended on the property, and the sounds of hammers and saws replaced the quiet hum of the woods. It was the sound of rebirth. While they worked on the house, I worked on the land. And at night, I worked on the past. I read my mother's journal. It was a painful, beautiful, and terrifying document. It detailed her love for my father, her joy at my birth, and then the slow, creeping dread of her life after his death. She wrote about her investigation, the small clues she uncovered, the people she talked to. She wrote about her fear, but also her stubborn refusal to be broken. "I am writing this down," one entry read, "so that if they get me, the story doesn't die with me. The truth has to matter. It has to." In the journal, she also wrote about the smokehouse. "Dad built it to keep the family fed through the winter," she wrote. "He used to say, some things you have to protect. You have to keep them safe and sound, away from the rot and the weather. I'm putting my hope in there. I'm putting Leo's future in there. It's the safest place I know." The smokehouse wasn't just an outbuilding. It was a vault, a sanctuary. It was a symbol of her foresight and her love. The house was slowly coming back to life. The new roof was on, keeping the rain out for the first time in years. New windows were installed, clear and bright, letting the sun pour in. The plumber got the water running, and an electrician rewired the entire house, making it safe. One afternoon, while Hank's crew was finishing up for the day, an old pickup truck I recognized pulled into the driveway. It was Sal, the man from the diner who had given me a ride on my first day. He got out, holding a covered casserole dish. "Smelled the sawdust from the main road," he said by way of greeting. "Figured a boy doing all this work could use a real meal." He handed me the dish. It was still warm. Lasagna. "My wife insisted," he added, though he didn't look upset about it. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he grunted. "Just eat." He looked at the house, at the new windows and the piles of fresh lumber. "You're really doing it. You're bringing the place back." "I'm trying," I said. He nodded, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. "Your mother would be proud. A lot of us in town, we're glad to see it. Glad to see someone finally standing up to Thorne and his bunch." He told me that my mother had been a friend to many people, quietly helping them out when she could. He told me that Titan Holdings had bullied and bought out dozens of small landowners over the years, changing the fabric of the community. "People are scared of them," he said, "but they're tired of being scared. Seeing you here, fighting back, it gives people hope." Before he left, he said, "If you need anything, and I mean anything, you just come by the diner. You're not as alone as you think you are, son." His words echoed what I had said to the men in the SUV. I'm not alone. It was becoming truer every day. That night, I ate lasagna at a clean kitchen table in a house with working lights. It was the first real meal in the first real home I'd had in 6 years. I cried again, but this time, the tears weren't just for what I had lost. They were for what I was starting to find. The physical work on the house was a kind of therapy, a way to channel my grief and anger into something productive, something tangible. Every nail I hammered, every board I replaced, felt like an act of defiance. I was not just repairing a building. I was rebuilding my life, right on the foundations my family had laid. While the house became more whole, Abernathy and I worked on the case. We made copies of all the evidence. He found a specialist to analyze the soil samples my mother had collected, confirming the presence of highly toxic industrial solvents. He located a retired FBI agent who was willing to consult with us, to help us package the evidence in a way that the state authorities couldn't ignore. It was a slow, methodical process. It was a second front in the war, one fought with paper and phone calls instead of hammers and saws. And all the while, the presence of Titan Holdings lingered. They didn't send their men in suits again. They were smarter than that. Instead, strange things started to happen. A delivery of lumber would be mysteriously canceled. A county inspector would show up unannounced, citing an anonymous complaint, and try to find a violation that would shut down our work. It was a campaign of harassment, designed to wear me down, to bleed me dry. But it had the opposite effect. Every petty obstacle just strengthened my resolve. And I wasn't alone anymore. When the inspector showed up, Hank was there, with every permit and document in perfect order. When a supplier refused to deliver, Sal made a few calls, and another supplier from a neighboring town was there the next day. The community, the one my mother had been a part of, was quietly closing ranks around me. They had been waiting for a reason to fight back, and I had become that reason. One evening, I found the last letter in the footlocker. I had been saving it. It was in a small envelope marked simply, "For when it's finished." I assumed she meant for when the fight was over, but sitting there in the nearly restored living room, with the smell of fresh paint in the air and the sound of crickets outside the new, clean windows, it felt like the right time. "My dearest Leo," it read, "if you are reading this, I hope it is because you can feel the sun on your face through a clean window in a warm house. I hope you have found peace here, not just struggle. I need you to know that the fight is not the point. The justice, the revenge, that is for your father. It is right, and it is necessary. But it is not the inheritance I wanted to leave you. Your inheritance is the sunrise over the East Ridge. It's the sound of the creek after a spring rain. It's the smell of the pine trees in the summer heat. It's the home your grandfather built, and the future you can build here. I fought for the land, Leo, not just for the evidence buried in it. I fought for the place itself. A home is not just a house. It is a place to be safe, a place to grow, a place to love. It is the one thing no one can ever truly take from you. Whatever happens with the fight, don't ever lose the home. Live in it. Be happy in it. That is all I ever really wanted. That is how we win. I folded the letter and put it back in the box. I finally understood. My mother's sacrifice wasn't just about justice. It was about giving me a place to belong. She hadn't just left me a mission. She had left me a home. The legal battle would be long. The future was still uncertain. But sitting there, in that house, on that land, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The ghosts were still here, my father and my mother, but they weren't haunting me anymore. They were watching over me. This was my home, and I was ready to live in it. The story isn't over, not by a long shot. The case against Titan Holdings is moving forward, and every day is a new challenge. But the house is warm, the lights are on, and there's a community around me that has my back. I started this journey as an orphan, aging out of the system, with nothing but a trash bag and a story someone else had written for me. But my mother left me the tools to write my own. She left me a locked smokehouse, and inside it, I found the truth. I found a fortune. I found a purpose. But most importantly, I found my way home. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story has been hard to tell, but it's important. It's about how the things we inherit aren't always about money or property. Sometimes, the most valuable inheritance is a choice, a second chance, a reason to fight for who you are. Maybe you've had a moment like that in your own life, a moment where you had to choose between the easy path and the right one. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something in you, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. We talk about real stories here, for real people who have been through real things. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me about a time you found strength you didn't know you had, or a time you had to fight for what you believed in. I read every single one, and your stories matter. You are not alone in this. Thank you for listening.